In the mist-shrouded waters off northern Scotland's coast, a grieving American archivist was about to inherit more than just a drowned castle for 95 cents. What started as settling her late mother's affairs took a shocking turn when she came face to face with towers rising from the tide like broken fingers, and a royal secret that had been deliberately submerged for 40 years. Nora Whittaker wasn't your typical historian. For the past decade, she had spent her life piecing together fragments of other people's histories at Boston's Historical Society, known for her relentless pursuit of truth and her inability to leave mysteries unsolved. When she received a cryptic inheritance notice and discovered her grandmother's warning, "The sea remembers what we buried," she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the crown. Nora's decision to explore the castle's flooded chambers would lead her to uncover proof of a legitimate royal heir, a forbidden marriage, and 3 generations of women who sacrificed everything to protect a child the monarchy tried to erase. What began as administrative curiosity would become an obsession that nearly drowned her. The Scottish village and the truth about a royal bloodline would never be the same after she chose to preserve what must be remembered, not what must destroy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Nora Whittaker held it against the morning light streaming through her Boston apartment window. The paper felt wrong, too thick, too old, like something that should have arrived decades ago instead of 3 weeks after her mother's funeral. She set her coffee down and studied the return address, a law firm in Edinburgh she had never heard of, her name written in careful script that belonged to another century. Inside, a single sheet of paper, legal language that made little sense until she reached the center paragraph. "You have inherited a property located off the coast of northern Scotland. The transaction fee required is 95 cents American." Nora read it twice. Then a third time, 95 cents. Her mother had never mentioned property in Scotland, had never mentioned anything beyond bedtime stories of ancestors who sailed from Edinburgh Harbour with nothing but their names and the clothes they wore. Those stories always ended the same way, with a castle that stood guard over dark waters until the sea decided to claim it back. But those were just stories. Nora folded the letter with deliberate care. She should throw it away, file it under administrative errors, and move on with her cataloguing work at the Historical Society. She had an entire collection of Revolutionary War correspondence waiting for her attention. She had responsibilities. Instead, she found herself reaching for the small wooden box her mother kept on the mantel. The one Nora had been avoiding since the funeral. The one that held the things her mother considered too precious to discard, but too painful to display. Inside, beneath faded ribbons and a pressed flower, she found another envelope. This one even older than the first. The paper crumbled slightly at her touch, her grandmother's handwriting. She recognized it from the single letter she had seen as a child. Before her mother tucked it away and refused to speak of it again, the words inside made her hands go still. "The sea remembers what we buried." Nothing else. No explanation, no date, just that single line in ink that had faded to the color of dried blood. Nora set both letters on her small dining table and stared at them until her coffee went cold. Outside, Boston continued its morning routine. Streetcars rattled past. Vendors called their prices. The world moved forward like it always did, but something had shifted in the small space of her apartment. Something that felt like her mother's voice whispering from a place beyond grief. She reached for her coat. Professor Alaric Dunthorne kept his office at the university like a man who believed in the power of calculated disorder. Books stacked in towers that defied physics. Maps spread across every surface. The air thick with pipe smoke and the smell of old leather. He looked up when Nora entered. his expression shifting from mild annoyance to genuine interest in the space of a heartbeat. "Miss Whittaker, I did not expect to see you so soon after your loss. I need your opinion on something." She placed both letters on the only clear space on his desk, a small rectangle between a translation of Beowulf and what appeared to be a Viking compass. Dunthorne read the inheritance notice first. His eyebrows rose slightly. Then he read her grandmother's letter. His expression became unreadable. "Well," he set the papers down with care that seemed excessive. "This is quite remarkable. It's a mistake." "It has to be, does it?" He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in a way that sounded almost alive. "Your grandmother was Margaret Whittaker, born Margaret Thorne in Edinburgh in 1851. She worked as a lady's maid before immigrating to America in 1884. Nora felt something cold settle in her chest. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been researching Scottish noble houses for 15 years. And the Thorne family appears in records connected to one of the most peculiar architectural mysteries of the last century." He stood and moved to a filing cabinet that looked like it might collapse under its own weight. A castle that supposedly drowned in 1884. Castles don't drown. No, they don't, not unless someone wants them to. He pulled out a folder thick with papers and photographs. The official record states the castle was abandoned due to structural instability, that a combination of erosion and storm damage made it uninhabitable, that it was left to the sea as a monument to nature's power. But you don't believe that. "I believe the official record often conceals more than it reveals." He spread several photographs across his desk. Black and white images of a castle rising from dark waters. Towers that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Stone that looked like it had grown from the earth rather than been placed there by human hands. "This is it?" Nora's voice came out softer than she intended. "This is what remains above the waterline. The rest lies beneath the tide." He tapped one photograph with a long finger. "Your grandmother worked there, in the final years before it was sealed." Sealed. That's the interesting part. The castle wasn't simply abandoned, it was deliberately flooded. The lower chambers were breached during an unusually high tide, but several locals claimed they saw men working at night, making certain the water found its way inside. Nora picked up one of the photographs. A young woman stood in front of the castle gates, her face serious, her hands folded in front of her, in a way that suggested duty rather than joy. She recognized her grandmother's eyes, even though she had never seen a photograph of her at that age. Why would anyone flood a castle deliberately? That is precisely what you should go to Scotland to discover. Dunthorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I would go myself, but I have obligations here. Lectures, publications, the tedious business of academic life. I can't just leave. I have work. You have a mystery. A family connection to one of the most intriguing architectural anomalies in modern history, and a legal claim to property that should not exist." He gathered the photographs and placed them in front of her. "Take these. Consider them a loan from the university's collection." Nora stared at the images, at her grandmother's young face, at the castle that reached from the waves like something trying to be remembered. What if it's dangerous? "Then you'll be careful. You're a historian. You understand the value of primary sources, of seeing things firsthand rather than trusting what others have written." He returned to his chair. "Besides, 95 cents seems a small price for answers to questions your mother took to her grave." The words hit harder than he probably intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he meant them to. Nora gathered the photographs, folded the letters back into their envelopes, made her decision in the space between one breath and the next. "I'll need 3 weeks. To arrange things at work, of course. I'll write you a letter of introduction to some colleagues in Edinburgh who might prove useful." He was already reaching for his fountain pen, already writing in that careful script that made everything seem more important than it was. Nora left his office carrying more questions than she had arrived with. But for the first time since her mother's death, she felt something other than the grey weight of grief. She felt purpose. The ship sailed from Boston Harbor on a morning that felt more like farewell than departure. Nora stood at the rail, watching America shrink behind her, watching the only home she had ever known become a line of smoke and distant buildings. She carried one small trunk, 2 changes of clothes, the photographs Dunthorne had given her, and the 2 letters that had started everything. The crossing took 8 days. 8 days of watching the ocean stretch endlessly in all directions, of feeling the ship rise and fall with swells that seemed to breathe, of wondering what she would find when she reached the other side. On the final night, she stood on deck long after the other passengers had retired. The stars overhead felt different than they did in Boston, colder, more distant, like they were watching something they had seen play out countless times before. She thought about her mother, about the stories she had whispered in the dark when Nora was young, stories of castles and secrets, of women who kept truths that could shatter kingdoms, stories that always ended with the same warning. Some things are buried for good reason, but Nora had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. It was why she had become an archivist in the first place, why she spent her days piecing together the fragments of other people's lives, why she believed that truth mattered more than comfort, even when the truth came with a cost. She touched her grandmother's letter in her coat pocket, the paper soft from repeated readings. The words burned into her memory like a brand. The sea remembers what we buried. Tomorrow she would reach Scotland. Tomorrow she would begin to understand what those words meant. Tonight, she stood at the rail and watched the dark water and tried not to think about drowning. The village emerged from the mist like something half-remembered from a dream. Stone cottages huddled together as if seeking warmth from each other. Narrow streets that wound without pattern or purpose. The harbour filled with fishing boats that bobbed in water the colour of slate. Nora stepped off the mail coach with her trunk and immediately understood why. Her mother had never spoken of this place. It felt like the end of something, like the last outpost before the world gave way to nothing but water and wind. A boy no older than 12 appeared at her elbow. "You'll be wanting the inn, then?" "I am. Follow me." "Mind the cobbles. They're slick when the mist comes in." He grabbed her trunk without asking and moved with the confidence of someone who had made this walk 1,000 times. Nora followed, aware of eyes watching from windows, of conversation stopping as she passed, of a silence that felt deliberate rather than natural. The inn sat at the edge of the village square, a 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left as if tired of standing upright. Smoke rose from its chimney in lazy spirals. Light glowed behind curtained windows. The boy set her trunk down and held out his hand. Nora gave him a coin. He studied it with the careful attention of someone used to being cheated. "You hear about the castle, then?" "What makes you think that?" "Americans don't come here for the fishing." He pocketed the coin. "Nobody talks about it, but everybody knows about it. That's how secrets work in places like this." Before Nora could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the mist like something that had never been quite solid to begin with. The inn's door opened before she could knock. A woman stood in the doorway, 60 years old or thereabouts, silver hair pulled back in a knot, eyes that seemed to measure Nora in a single glance. "You'll be Miss Whittaker, then. How did your professor friend sent word. Said you'd be arriving about now. Said you'd be asking questions." The woman stepped aside. "Come in before you catch your death. The mist here gets into your bones if you let it." Inside, the inn smelled of peat smoke and bread baking. A fire burned in the hearth. 2 old men sat at a corner table playing cards with the intensity of people settling old debts. "I'm Morven Ainsley. I keep this place." The woman moved behind a worn wooden counter. "You'll want the room upstairs. Overlooks the bay, so you can see what you came for. The castle, if you want to call it that. Most of us just call it the ruins. Less romantic that way. Less likely to attract foolish people with foolish ideas." Morven produced a key that looked older than the building itself. "Though I suppose if your grandmother worked there, you've got more right than most to be foolish about it." Nora set her traveling bag down. "You knew my grandmother?" "Knew of her. I was only a child when she left. But people remember. especially when someone leaves the way she did. In the middle of the night, with nothing but what she could carry. Morven's expression softened slightly. She never came back, not even when the old lady died. The old lady? Lady Isolde Ravenshade, the last one to live there before the sea came in. Morven handed Nora the key. Your grandmother was her maid, stayed with her until the very end, or near enough to it. The two old men had stopped playing cards. They sat very still, watching Nora with expressions she couldn't quite read. I need to see the castle. I need a guide. You need Ewan McCleary, then? He's the only one who'll take you. Though whether he will is another question entirely. Morven gestured toward the stairs. Get yourself settled. I'll send word to him. See if he's willing. And if he isn't, then you'll have to wait for low tide and row yourself. Though I wouldn't recommend it. The currents around the ruins have claimed more than one person who thought they knew better than the locals. Nora took the key and climbed the narrow stairs. Found her room exactly as promised. Small, clean, with a window that looked out over the bay. She opened that window despite the cold. Stood there breathing in air that tasted of salt and something older than salt. In the distance, barely visible through the mist. She saw them, the towers. They rose from the water like broken fingers reaching for sky they would never touch again. Black stone against grey water. Seaweed hanging from their sides like funeral shrouds. Her grandmother had walked through those towers, had lived in rooms now filled with fish and darkness, had kept secrets that followed her across an ocean and into a new life. Nora pulled out the photograph Dunthorne had given her, held it up against the view, tried to imagine what the castle had looked like before the sea claimed it, before someone decided it was better drowned than standing. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who didn't care about being heard. A knock on her door. Come in. The man who entered had to duck slightly to fit through the door frame, broad-shouldered, weather-beaten, face that suggested a life spent on the water. Dark hair shot through with premature grey. Eyes the colour of storm clouds. I'm Ewan McCleary. Morven says you want to go to the ruins. I do. Why? He didn't move from the doorway, didn't smile, just watched her with an intensity that made her want to step back. I inherited the property. I want to see what belongs to me. Nothing there belongs to anyone. The sea doesn't recognize human ownership. He crossed his arms. You'll need to wait for tomorrow morning. Low tide is just after dawn. That's the only safe time to approach. I'll pay you for your trouble. I don't want your money, but I'll take you anyway, because Morven asked. And because your grandmother deserves better than having her granddaughter drown in the same water that took what she tried to protect. Before Nora could ask what he meant, he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. The front door opening and closing, she returned to the window, to the towers that waited in the mist. Tomorrow she would learn what her grandmother had tried to protect. Tomorrow she would understand why someone had decided to drown a castle rather than let its secrets stand. Tonight she stood at her window and watched the tide roll in, watched the towers disappear beneath the waves, watched the bay become a flat expanse of dark water that revealed nothing. Somewhere beneath that surface, rooms waited, halls her grandmother had walked, chambers where Lady Isolde Ravenshade had lived out her final days before fleeing or dying or whatever fate had claimed her. Nora touched the cold glass, made a promise to the reflection staring back at her. She would find the truth, no matter how deep she had to dive to reach it. Dawn arrived reluctantly. The mist hung so thick Nora could barely see the water from her window. But she dressed quickly, pulled on the practical clothes she had brought for exactly this purpose. Sturdy boots, a coat that could handle weather and water. Downstairs, Morven had tea waiting, and bread still warm from the oven. Eat. You'll need your strength. The tide waits for no one, and Ewan won't linger once you're there. He doesn't want me to go. He doesn't want anyone to go. His family has been protecting those ruins for generations. First from the crown, now from people like you. Morven poured tea with steady hands. But he's a good man. He'll keep you safe, even if he thinks you're making a terrible mistake. Do you think I'm making a mistake? Morven set the teapot down, looked at Nora with eyes that seemed to hold more years than her face suggested. I think some doors should stay closed. But I also think you didn't come all this way to turn back now. So I'll tell you what I remember. What I saw the night the castle drowned. You were there. I was 8 years old, standing on these very cliffs with my mother, watching torches burn in the towers, even as the water rose. Morven sat down heavily. There were people in there, working, carrying things out. And then the tide came in fast, faster than any tide I'd seen before or since. And the torches went out, one by one, like candles being snuffed by an invisible hand. What happened to the people inside? That's what nobody talks about. Some say they got out before the water came. Some say they drowned doing whatever work they were sent to do. But I know what I saw. Morven leaned forward. I saw your grandmother standing on the highest tower, watching the water rise, and she didn't look afraid. She looked satisfied, like she'd accomplished something important, and then she disappeared. The next morning, the tower was empty. Your grandmother was gone, and anyone who tried to ask questions found themselves talking to locked doors and sealed mouths. Footsteps on the porch. The door opened without a knock. Ewan filled the frame. Water dripped from his oilskin coat, tides turning. We go now or we wait another 12 hours. Nora stood, took a final sip of tea, met Morven's eyes, and saw something there that looked like both warning and blessing. Thank you for the breakfast. Thank you for listening to an old woman's memories. They're all I have of that night. All anyone has now. Morven touched Nora's hand briefly. Be careful in there. The sea remembers. But sometimes memory isn't enough to keep you safe. The boat was small, designed for one man and his nets. It rocked alarmingly as Nora climbed in. Ewan pushed off without ceremony. The oars cutting through water that looked black in the early light. They rowed in silence, the mist closing around them like a living thing. The only sound the splash of oars and the cry of gulls overhead. Then the towers emerged, closer now, real in a way they hadn't been from her window. Stone covered in barnacles, seaweed draped like mourning cloth, windows that gaped like empty eyes staring at nothing. Low tide lasts an hour, maybe less. When I say we leave, we leave. Ewan's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The water comes back fast. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't give warnings. I understand. Do you? Because you have the look of someone who's forgotten. There are things more dangerous than unanswered questions. He brought them alongside a section of wall where stone steps descended into the water. At low tide, the steps rose above the waterline. A bridge between the world of heir and the world beneath. Nora stepped out carefully. The stones slick beneath her boots, covered in moss and things that had made the ruins their home. I'm going inside. I'm not. Ewan remained in the boat. My family swore an oath. To keep people out. To let the sea keep what it took. I'm already breaking that oath by bringing you here. I won't break it further by following you in. Then wait here. I won't be long. You don't know that. Time moves differently in there. I've seen people go in for what they thought was minutes and come out hours later, confused, changed. He pointed to the highest visible opening. That's the main hall. The grand entrance is 30 feet underwater now. But if you're careful, you can get into the upper chambers from there. Nora climbed, her hands finding purchase on stone that felt older than it should, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with years. The kind of ancient that came from bearing witness to secrets. The opening led to a corridor, narrow, dark. She pulled out the small electric torch she had brought, its beam cutting through shadows that seemed reluctant to retreat. The walls were covered in tapestries that had somehow survived the salt and water. Images of battles, of kings and queens, of ceremonies that looked both sacred and terrible. The corridor opened into the main hall. Nora stopped breathing. The space was massive, vaulted ceilings that disappeared into darkness. Pillars carved with symbols she didn't recognize. And at the far end, a throne, empty, waiting. But it was the portraits that made her hands shake. They lined the walls, dozens of them, faces that stared down with expressions ranging from pride to sorrow. And in the center, directly across from where Nora stood, a woman who could have been her twin, same dark hair, same sharp features, same eyes that seemed to hold questions instead of answers. The nameplate read, Lady Isolde Ravenshade. 1854-1884, Nora moved closer, the torch beam illuminating details that shouldn't have survived 30 years underwater. The delicate lace collar, the ring on her left hand, the slight smile that suggested secrets kept and secrets won, and beside the portrait, a door, smaller than the others. Easy to miss unless you knew to look for it. Nora tried the handle. It opened with a sound like a sigh. Inside, a room that felt more like a sanctuary than a chamber. A desk, shelves lined with books that had turned to pulp. A bed covered in seaweed and barnacles, and on the desk, protected by what looked like waxed canvas, wrapped in oilskin, a diary. Nora lifted it with shaking hands. The leather cover embossed with the same royal seal she had seen in Dunthorne's photographs. She opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant. Each letter formed with precision. The ink faded but still legible. The first entry was dated January 1884. They have decided I know too much, that my silence cannot be bought, that the only way to ensure their secret dies is to ensure I die with it. Nora turned the page, her torch beam steady despite the tremor in her hands. But they underestimate what a woman will do to protect what she loves. They underestimate the loyalty of those they consider beneath notice. They underestimate the power of truth. Let them sink these walls. Let them flood these chambers. The sea will remember what they try to forget. And someday, someone will come who understands that some secrets survive drowning. Another page. The handwriting more urgent now. I have hidden the child where they will never find her. In a place only Margaret knows. Only she can be trusted. Only she understands what this means. If you are reading this, then Margaret kept her promise. Then the truth survived even when I could not. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The diary continued. Entry after entry detailing a royal scandal. A hidden marriage. A child born to a union that threatened the entire line of succession. A decision made in palace chambers to erase the problem by erasing the castle itself. Nora read until her torch began to dim. Read until she heard Ewan shouting from below, "The tide's turning! You need to leave now." She looked up. Water had begun seeping under the door. Not much, just enough to glisten in the torchlight. Just enough to remind her that the sea was patient, but not infinitely so. She tucked the diary inside her coat, moved back through the chamber, down the corridor where the tapestries now dripped with water that hadn't been there before. At the entrance, she paused. Something made her turn back. Some sound that wasn't quite sound. Some presence that felt like being watched by someone who wasn't quite there. A woman's voice, distant, echoing as if from very far away or very deep below. Singing. A melody. Nora didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Her grandmother's voice in her memory, humming that same tune while making tea on cold mornings. Nora! Ewan's voice. Sharp with fear, she tore herself away, climbed down the slick stone steps, into the boat that bobbed in water that now lapped at the second step instead of the fifth. Ewan pulled the oars without a word, his face set in an expression that looked like both anger and relief. They were halfway back to shore when Nora looked back. The towers were disappearing again, being reclaimed by the tide. In another hour, they would be nothing but shadows beneath the surface. But she had what she came for. The diary pressed against her chest. Proof that her grandmother had been part of something larger than herself. That she had kept a promise across decades and an ocean. That some truths survived drowning. What did you find? Ewan didn't look at her. Just kept rowing with steady strokes. Everything. Nora touched the diary through her coat. I found everything. Then God help you. Because everything is exactly what some people would kill to keep buried. The shore emerged from the mist. Morven stood at the dock, her expression unreadable. Behind her a figure Nora didn't recognize. well-dressed, out of place in a fishing village. Ewan saw him too. His jaw tightened. "That's trouble. How do you know?" "Because I know what men look like when they're hunting something. And he has the look of someone who's been hunting for a very long time." They reached the dock. Nora climbed out, her legs unsteady on solid ground. The stranger smiled. "It didn't reach his eyes, Miss Whittaker." "What a pleasure. Professor Dunthorne sends his regards, and his concern for your safety. It's dangerous to explore ruins without proper support." Nora's hand moved to her coat, to the diary hidden beneath. "I don't need support. Perhaps not. But you might need protection from those who would prefer the past remained buried." His smile widened. "I'm here to offer that protection. For a price, of course." "I'm not interested. Not yet. But you will be. Once you understand what you've found. Once you realize that some people will do anything to ensure certain truths never see daylight." He tipped his hat. "Think about it, Miss Whittaker. The sea kept its secrets for 30 years. It would be a shame if they drowned again before anyone learned what they were." He walked away, disappearing into the village with the confidence of someone who knew they would meet again. Morven touched Nora's arm. "Come inside. You're shaking. I'm fine. You're not. But you will be. Once you're warm and dry and you've told me what you found in there." She glanced at Ewan. "Both of you, inside. Now." They followed her into the inn. Into warmth and light and the smell of something cooking. Into a space that felt safe, even though Nora knew safety was an illusion, because she had found the truth. And now the truth would have to be protected, just like her grandmother had protected it, just like Lady Isolde had tried to protect it, even if protection meant risking everything. She pulled the diary from her coat. "Set it on the table." Watched Morven's face go pale as she recognized the seal. Sweet, merciful heaven. "You found her diary?" "I found more than that." Nora opened to the first page. "I found proof of everything outside." The tide continued to rise, covering the towers, hiding them from sight, keeping secrets that had survived one drowning and might have to survive another. But this time, Nora would make sure the truth stayed above water. No matter what it cost, no matter who tried to pull it back down into the depths, because her grandmother had kept a promise. And now it was Nora's turn to keep it, even if the sea itself tried to stop her. The candle burned low on Morven's kitchen table. Nora had been reading for hours. The diary spread before her like a map to somewhere she wasn't certain she wanted to go. Ewan sat across from her, silent, his presence more protective than intrusive. Morven had gone to bed an hour ago after making them promise not to do anything foolish. Nora turned another page. The handwriting grew more frantic as the entries progressed. March 15th, 1884. They came today. Men in royal livery who spoke in careful words that meant terrible things. They offered money, then threats, then promises of what would happen if I refused to cooperate. I told them nothing. Margaret stood beside me, silent, brave. Together we are stronger than their fear. Your grandmother was mentioned by name. Ewan leaned forward. That changes things. Everything changed the moment I opened this diary. Nora found the passage she had been searching for. Listen to this, she read aloud. March 22nd, 1884. The child sleeps in the tower room, unaware of the storm gathering around her small life. She has her father's eyes, her mother's determination. She will grow to be someone remarkable. If she is allowed to grow at all, Margaret and I have made our plans. When they come with their engineers and their excuses, when they bring the tide in deliberately, we will be ready. The child will be hidden where water cannot reach, where only those who know to look will find her, where she can sleep until someone with enough courage comes to wake the truth. A child, Ewan's voice was barely audible. They hid a child, a legitimate heir to the throne, born from a marriage the royal family refused to acknowledge. Nora turned to the final entries, her hands trembling slightly. Isolde was protecting evidence that could have changed everything. The last page was dated April 10, 1884. Tonight they will sink these walls. I have done all I can. Margaret has sworn her oath. The child is safe. The proof is sealed. If they sink the walls, they sink the truth. But the sea remembers what we bury, and someday someone will come who understands that some secrets survive drowning. To whoever reads this, look below. Look where the water meets stone. Look where Margaret's cross marks the place where innocence was laid to rest. Forgive us. We did what love demanded. Nora closed the diary. Her chest tight with something between grief and rage. She knew. She knew they were going to flood the castle, and she stayed anyway. To protect the child. Ewan stood and moved to the window. My great-grandfather was there that night. Part of the crew ordered to breach the walls. He never spoke of it. But my grandmother said he woke screaming for years afterward. Why didn't he refuse? Because they threatened his family, his children, everyone he loved. Ewan turned back to face her. The crown doesn't make requests. It makes examples. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain hit the windows. There's more. Nora opened the diary to a page near the middle. Look at the margins, written in different ink, smaller, almost hidden in the spaces between Isolde's elegant script. Margaret's notes. Forgive me. The child sleeps in the vault beneath the Lady Chapel, 3 stones down from the altar, behind the carving of the rose. I placed your mother's cross there so you would know, so you would understand that love survives even drowning. The sea cannot claim what we give willingly to its keeping. Your grandmother left you a map. Ewan's expression shifted. She wanted you to find this, to finish what she started. But the child, if she was hidden in 1884, she would be dead by now. Bones, nothing more. Ewan's voice was gentle, but the proof would survive. Documents, something that proves her existence. Her legitimacy. The storm was building. Rain lashing the windows now. Wind making the inn's timbers creak. Nora stood, moved to the window, watched lightning illuminate the bay. For a moment the castle's towers were visible, black spires against white fire. And in that flash of light she saw something else, a figure standing on the highest visible tower, a woman in a dress that belonged to another century, her hand raised as if in greeting, or warning, then darkness. The image gone so quickly, Nora couldn't be certain she had seen it at all. We need to go back. Her voice surprised her with its certainty. Tomorrow, at low tide, in this storm. The tide will be unpredictable, dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. But if Dunthorne's people get there first, they won't find it. Not without your grandmother's notes. You don't know that. You don't know what they're willing to do. Nora turned from the window. I'm going. With or without you, Ewan studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. Then I'm going with you. Because you're right about one thing. This is dangerous. And you'll need someone who knows those waters. He moved toward the door. Get some sleep. We leave at first light, storm or no storm. After he left, Nora sat alone in the kitchen, the candle burning down to a stub, the diary open to her grandmother's hidden message. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else raged. A need to know, to understand. To finish what generations of women had started, she touched the page where her grandmother's handwriting mingled with Isolde's. I'm coming. I'll find her. I promise. The candle flickered once, then went out. In the darkness, Nora could have sworn she heard singing, that same melody from the castle. Her grandmother's voice and another voice intertwined, a lullaby for a child who had been sleeping for 40 years. Morning arrived without sunshine. The storm had settled into steady rain that turned the village streets to mud. Nora packed quickly, the diary wrapped in oilskin and tucked deep in her bag. Downstairs, voices, male, confident. She descended the stairs carefully, found Professor Dunthorne sitting at Morven's best table, tea steaming in front of him, his traveling coat spotted with rain. Miss Whittaker, I'm relieved to find you safe. His smile was warm, practiced. When I heard you'd actually gone to the ruins, I came as quickly as I could. I didn't ask you to come, no. But as your mentor, I felt responsible. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit, we have much to discuss. Morven stood by the kitchen door, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes held a warning. Nora sat, kept her bag close. I understand you found something interesting during your visit. Dunthorne's tone remained casual. The locals are quite agitated. talking about Americans disturbing what should remain undisturbed. The locals talk about a lot of things. Indeed, but some talk is more valuable than others. He sipped his tea. I also understand you may have recovered documents from the site. Historical materials that require proper translation and preservation. If I had, they would be my property. Part of my inheritance. Legally, yes. But morally? Dunthorne set his cup down with care. Such documents could rewrite history. They require expert handling. The kind of expertise I've spent my career developing. You want me to give you the diary. I want you to allow me to help you understand it. To translate the more obscure passages. To verify its authenticity. His smile never wavered. Surely you see the wisdom in this. What I see is someone who traveled a long way, very quickly. Almost as if they were expecting me to find something. The smile faltered. Just for a moment. I had hoped you would make discoveries. I had no way of knowing what those discoveries might be. Didn't you? Nora pulled the diary from her bag, watched his eyes lock onto it with unmistakable hunger. Because this diary mentions royal involvement in sinking the castle. It mentions specific names, specific orders. May I see it? No, the word hung in the air between them. Dunthorne's expression shifted, the warmth draining away, leaving something colder beneath. Miss Whittaker, I understand you're protective of your findings, but you're in over your head. There are forces at work here that you cannot possibly comprehend. Then explain them to me. Some things are better left unexplained, better left buried. He stood. I'm staying at the inn in the next village. When you're ready to be reasonable, send word, before you make a mistake that cannot be undone. He left, the door closing with deliberate softness. Morvan emerged from the kitchen. That man is dangerous. I know. No, you don't. Not yet. Morvan sat heavily. He came here 5 years ago, asking questions about the castle, offering money for information. 2 men who helped him, who guided his boats, who showed him things they shouldn't have shown. She paused. They disappeared. One in a boating accident. One simply vanished. You think Dunthorne was responsible? I think men who want something badly enough stop caring about the cost. And that man wants whatever is in that diary more than he wants anything else in this world. The front door opened. Ewan entered, shaking rain from his coat. He saw Nora's face and stopped. What happened? Dunthorne arrived. He wants the diary. Of course he does. Ewan moved to the window, scanned the street outside. There are strangers in the village. 3 men, watching this inn, watching the harbor. His people, likely. Which means we have a problem. He turned back to them. If they're watching, they'll follow us to the castle. They'll see what we find. Then we don't let them follow us. Nora stood, decision crystallizing. We go tonight. During the storm, when visibility is poor and the tide is unpredictable. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's also unexpected. They'll be watching for us to wait for better weather, for safer conditions. She looked between them. My grandmother didn't wait for safety. She did what needed doing. So will I. Morvan reached under the counter, pulled out an old metal box. Inside, papers yellowed with age. Your grandmother left these with me. Made me promise to give them to any of her blood who came searching. She handed them to Nora. She knew someone would come eventually. She just didn't know it would take 40 years. Nora unfolded the papers carefully. A map, hand-drawn, showing the castle's layout. Chambers marked with careful notes. And at the bottom, beneath the Lady Chapel, 3 stones down from the altar. Behind the carving of the rose, where the child sleeps, she left instructions. Nora's voice caught. She wanted me to find her. Then we find her tonight. Ewan's expression was set. Before anyone else does. Before the truth drowns again. Outside, thunder rolled. The storm intensifying. As if the sea itself knew what they planned. As if it was preparing to either help or hinder. Nora tucked the map and diary back into her bag. Made her choice. Stepped past the point where turning back was possible. Tonight, then. When the storm is at its worst. When the tide is at its lowest, Ewan corrected. 3 hours past midnight. That's when we go. They spent the day preparing, gathering supplies. Ropes and lanterns and tools that might be needed. Not speaking about the danger. Not acknowledging the very real possibility that they might not return. As dusk fell, Nora stood at her window, watched lights appear on the cliffs. 3 separate fires. Dunthorne's men, keeping watch, but they were watching the harbor, waiting for morning, expecting rational behavior from people who had stopped being rational the moment they decided truth mattered more than safety. She touched the window glass, cold beneath her fingers. "I'm coming, grandmother. I'm finishing what you started." In the distance, barely audible beneath the storm, she heard it again, the singing. A woman's voice carried on wind and rain, guiding her forward, or perhaps warning her back. Either way, she would go, because some promises transcended generations. Some truths demanded resurrection, even if resurrection came with a price measured in storms and drowning and the weight of secrets that had been buried for 40 years. Midnight found Nora standing at her window, watching the fires on the cliffs slowly die. Dunthorne's men seeking shelter from the storm, believing their vigil could wait until morning. They were wrong. A soft knock on her door. Ewan's voice barely audible above the wind. "It's time." She gathered her things. The diary, the map, a waterproof bag Morven had provided, sturdy rope, a lantern with oil enough for 2 hours, maybe 3 if they were careful. Downstairs, Morven waited, her face drawn with worry. The tide is lower than it should be. The storm has pushed the water out. You'll have more access, but less time. When the tide returns, it will return fast. We'll be careful. Careful people don't row into storms in the middle of the night, but Morven embraced her anyway, brief, fierce. Your grandmother would be proud, or furious, possibly both. Outside, rain lashed sideways, the wind strong enough to make standing difficult. Ewan led the way to a different part of the harbor, away from the main docks, where a smaller boat waited, hidden between 2 derelict fishing vessels. How did you know Dunthorne's men wouldn't watch this spot? Because this is where boats go when they're being scrapped. No one pays attention to dead things. He helped her into the boat. Hold tight. The water will be rough. Rough was an understatement. The boat pitched violently the moment they left shelter, waves crashing over the bow, rain making everything slick and treacherous. Ewan rowed with the steady determination of someone who had been born to the sea, who understood its moods, who respected its power without fearing it. The castle emerged from darkness like something conjured by the storm. The tide had indeed pulled back, revealing foundations that hadn't seen air in decades. Stairs that descended into black water, openings that usually remained submerged, including one that matched her grandmother's map perfectly, the entrance to the vaults beneath the Lady Chapel. "There," Nora pointed. "That's where we need to go." Ewan brought them alongside, the boat scraping against stone. He tied off to a rusted ring that had once secured much larger vessels. 2 hours. That's all we have. Maybe less if the storm pushes the tide back early. He lit the lantern, its light feeble against the darkness. "Stay close. The lower levels will be flooded, dangerous." They descended. The stairs, slick with algae and 40 years of salt. The walls pressing close. The sound of dripping water echoing until it sounded like voices, whispering in unknown tongues. At the bottom, a corridor, partially flooded. Water up to their knees. Cold enough to steal breath, Nora pulled out the map, oriented herself. The Lady Chapel should be directly ahead. Through this passage and up 1 level, they moved forward, the lantern creating shadows that danced like living things. Past chambers that had once been storage. Past what looked like a kitchen. Past stairs that led down into water so black it might as well have been void. The passage opened into a circular room, small, intimate. The remains of an altar still visible beneath layers of moss and decay. The Lady Chapel, 3. Stones down from the altar, Nora counted. Found the stone her grandmother had marked. Behind the carving of the rose. The carving was barely visible, worn almost smooth by water and time. But when she traced its outline, she felt it. A slight depression. A seam. "Help me move this." Together they worked, leveraging the stone, using rope and a piece of driftwood as a fulcrum. The stone resisting, then grinding, then suddenly giving way with a sound like a sigh. Behind it, a cavity. Smaller than expected, but dry. Perfectly sealed. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, a small bundle, Nora reached in with shaking hands. Pulled the bundle free. Unwrapped it carefully. Not a child's body. Thank God, not that a small wooden box. Carved with symbols she recognized from the diary. The royal crest intertwined with another she didn't know. Inside the box, documents, letters, a marriage certificate dated 1880, a birth certificate dated 1881, a locket containing 2 miniature portraits. And beneath it all a cross, silver, worn smooth by handling, her grandmother's cross. The one she wore in the photograph from 1884. She left it here. Nora's voice broke. So I would know. So I would understand. A sound above them, footsteps, multiple people moving through the castle. Ewan extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging them into absolute darkness. They found us. His whisper barely reached her. They must have followed despite the storm, or they knew where to look. Nora clutched the box to her chest. Dunthorne knew more than he admitted. He's been here before. The footsteps grew closer. Voices now, discussing which passage to take. This way. Ewan's hand found hers. There's another exit, through the crypts. It floods at high tide, but we might make it before water rushed in. Not gradually, not with warning, a wall of it. Cold and violent and absolute, the tide returning. Nora felt herself lifted, tumbled, the box nearly torn from her grasp. Ewan's hand ripped away. Darkness and cold, and the certainty that this was drowning. This was how it ended. Then light, faint, green-tinged, impossible, a figure in the water. A woman in a dress that moved independent of current. Her hand extended. Lady Isolde, Nora reached for her. Their fingers didn't quite touch. Couldn't touch. Because the dead don't touch the living, but they can guide. The apparition moved, leading through tunnels that shouldn't exist, through passages that felt more like memory than stone, until suddenly there was air. A pocket of it, a chamber that had somehow stayed dry. Nora broke the surface, gasping, still clutching the box. Still alive against all probability, Ewan surfaced beside her seconds later, coughing water, his face pale in the lantern light that somehow still burned. What just happened? I saw her, Isolde. She showed me the way. That's impossible. So is surviving that. But here we are. Nora looked around. They were in a crypt. Stone coffins lined the walls, and at the far end, stairs leading up. We need to keep moving, they climbed. Emerged into the main hall, the portraits still watching, but now they felt different, less mournful, more expectant. Outside voices. Dunthorne's men searching. Getting closer. The boat. Ewan moved to the exit, then stopped. It's gone. The tide took it, then we swim. In this storm? That's our only option. Unless you want to hand them everything my grandmother died protecting. They ran. Down the slick stairs, into water that had risen dramatically in the minutes they'd been inside. The storm still raging, waves high enough to capsize anything less than a ship. Nora dove. The cold a shock that nearly stopped her heart. She kicked hard. The box tucked into her shirt. Ewan beside her. Both of them fighting current and storm and exhaustion. The shore was impossibly far. But they swam, stroke after stroke, until Nora's arms screamed, until breathing became optional, until the only thing keeping her moving was the weight of the box against her chest. A wave, larger than the rest, lifting her, carrying her. She should fight it, should resist. Instead, she let it take her. The wave deposited her on rocky shore, gentle despite its size, as if the sea itself had decided to help rather than hinder. Ewan appeared beside her moments later. Both of them collapsed, breathing hard, alive. Behind them, the castle was disappearing again, the tide reclaiming what it had briefly released. Dunthorne's men would find nothing, because everything that mattered was here, wrapped in oilskin and pressed against Nora's heart. We did it. She could barely form the words. We found her. We found proof. But at what cost? Ewan helped her stand. Dunthorne knows now. He knows we have something. He won't stop. Neither will I. They made their way back to the village, to Morven's Inn. to light and warmth and the beginning of understanding what they had truly discovered. The sea had kept its secret for 40 years. Now that secret belonged to the living, to those brave enough or foolish enough to resurrect what had been deliberately drowned. The question was what to do with it. Whether truth was worth the price it would demand. Nora touched the box beneath her wet clothes, felt the weight of history, of lives lived and lost, of a child who never grew up, of women who sacrificed everything for a truth that might change nothing, or might change everything. The storm was beginning to break. Dawn approaching, light touching the horizon. Tomorrow they would decide. Tonight they would simply survive, because survival was its own kind of victory, its own kind of promise kept. Morning found them in Morven's kitchen, clothes dry, bodies exhausted. The box on the table between them, like an unexploded shell. "Open it," Morven's voice was steady. "Let's see what 3 generations of women died protecting." Nora's hands shook as she lifted the lid again. In daylight, the contents looked even more damning. Documents written in careful script. Names she recognized from history books. Dates that proved everything official history claimed was a lie. A marriage, legal, witnessed. Ewan read over her shoulder. "Between Prince Edmund and Catherine Thorne, your grandmother's older sister." I didn't know she had a sister. No one did. That was the point. Morven picked up the birth certificate. A daughter. Helena Catherine, born February 1881, 3 years before the castle drowned, which means she would have been a legitimate heir, ahead of the prince's official children in the line of succession. Nora felt the weight of it settling. They couldn't allow that, so they erased her. Erased the marriage. Erased Catherine. Ewan's voice was flat. My great-grandfather was part of that erasure. He helped flood the castle. He helped bury the truth. Under threat. Nora touched his arm. "You said so yourself. They threatened his family. Threats don't absolve guilt. They just explain it." He moved to the window, stared out at the grey morning. "My family took an oath to guard the secret, to ensure no one disturbed what the sea had claimed. We've kept that oath for 40 years, and now I'm breaking it, because some oaths are meant to be broken." He turned back to them. "The child, Helena, what happened to her?" Nora found the letter tucked beneath the certificates, written in her grandmother's hand. "My dearest Catherine, by the time anyone reads this, you will be long gone. As will I, as will the child we tried so hard to protect." Helena passed in her sleep 3 weeks after we sealed these documents. Not from violence or deliberate harm, but from a fever that no amount of love could cure. She was 3 years old, too young to understand the storm gathering around her small life. I buried her beneath the Lady Chapel, in the vault we created together. I gave her your cross to carry into whatever comes after. I marked the place so that someday, if the truth needed resurrection, someone would know where to find proof of her existence. The marriage was real. Your love was real. Your daughter was real. Let history deny it all at once. The sea remembers. And so do I." Nora's hands shook. "She died before they flooded the castle. Natural causes, which means all of this. The flooding, the cover-up, everything." Ewan's voice was hollow. "It was for nothing. No, it was to erase the marriage, to ensure no questions could ever be asked." Morven took the letter gently. "They didn't know the child had died, or they didn't care. They were erasing the possibility. The threat, a knock on the door, sharp, authoritative. Morven opened it to find Dunthorne standing in the pale morning light, his clothes dry, his expression controlled. Behind him, the 3 men Nora had seen watching the inn. "Miss Whittaker, I believe you have something that belongs in a museum, under proper academic supervision. I have something that belongs to my family. That's all. Your family's relationship to these documents is precisely why you cannot be trusted to preserve them objectively." He stepped inside without invitation. "I'm prepared to offer compensation, generous compensation, and recognition for your discovery. I don't want your compensation. Then what do you want? Fame? Publication rights?" His eyes moved to the box. "Or do you want to destroy the monarchy? To rewrite history based on documents that could easily be forgeries?" "They're not forgeries. Prove it. Without exposing them to proper analysis. They're just old paper with old ink. He moved closer, his men flanking him. Be reasonable. You cannot win this. The Crown has resources you cannot imagine. Influence that spans continents. If you try to publish this, you'll be destroyed. Professionally, personally, completely. Get out of my inn. Morven's voice was ice. Before I have the constable remove you, the constable answers to the Crown. Like everyone else in this village. Dunthorne's mask slipped, showing something hungry beneath. Last chance, Miss Whittaker. Cooperate or face consequences. I'll take the consequences. He stared at her, measuring, then nodded slowly. As you wish. But understand, you're not just protecting documents. You're protecting a secret that powerful people need to stay secret. And they will do whatever necessary to ensure it does. He left, his men following, the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Morven locked the door, drew the curtains. We need to move the documents. Somewhere safe, the attic. Ewan was already moving. I know a hiding place, where my grandmother kept things she didn't want found. They climbed narrow stairs, into a space that smelled of dust and time. Ewan went directly to a corner, moved aside boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades, revealed a loose board, beneath it a space. And inside that space, another box, my grandmother's. He pulled it out carefully. She kept her own records, her own memories of what happened. Inside, a journal, written in Gaelic, photographs, and a map identical to the one Nora's grandmother had left. They knew each other. Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Our grandmothers. They were both there, both part of it. Morven took the journal, began translating, her voice growing softer as she read. She writes about the night the castle flooded, about watching Margaret Thorne standing on the highest tower, about knowing what she was protecting, about the oath her husband swore and the price it cost their family. She turned pages, found a passage near the end. If Margaret's blood ever returns, if someone comes seeking truth, help them. The oath we swore was to protect the innocent, not to serve those who killed them. Break the oath if you must, but protect the truth. She wanted this. Ewan sat heavily. She wanted someone to finish what they started. Then we finish it. Nora placed her box beside his grandmother's journal. But we do it carefully. We preserve everything. We verify everything. And we decide together what truth serves and what truth destroys. How long do we have? Morven looked toward the window. Toward the dawn, breaking over water that had kept secrets for too long. Not long. Dunthorne will move against us soon. Before we can secure the documents elsewhere. Before we can tell anyone what we found. Nora made her decision. We go back tonight, one final time. We verify the burial site. We document everything. And then we decide the storm is passing. The tide will be unpredictable. Ewan's protest was automatic, but his eyes said he would go anyway. Everything about this has been unpredictable. One more night won't change that. She looked between them. My grandmother kept this secret for 40 years. She did it alone, in a foreign country, without help or recognition. I can keep it for one more day while we decide what it means. They spent the day preparing, documenting what they had, making copies of the most crucial documents, hiding some, keeping others close, building a record that could survive even if they didn't. As dusk approached, Nora stood at the window, watching lights appear on the cliffs again. Dunthorne's men, patient, certain, but certainty was a luxury. And she was done with luxuries. Tonight, they would finish what 3 generations had started. They would lay the truth bare. They would let the sea decide whether it wanted to keep its secrets or finally let them go. Ewan appeared beside her. Ready? No, but that's never stopped me before. Morven handed them each a bag. Supplies, rope, lanterns, food for afterward. If there was an afterward, come back. It wasn't a request. Both of you. Come back. We will. Nora embraced her briefly. We have to. Someone needs to tell the story. They slipped out into twilight, into mist rolling in from the sea, into one final descent toward truth that had been buried too long. Behind them, the inn's light grew small. Ahead, the castle waited, and beneath its waves, The ghosts of 3 women who had sacrificed everything for a child, who died before the water could claim her. Tonight, that sacrifice would finally mean something. Tonight the sea would remember. And so would the world. The tide was already rising when they reached the castle. Not the slow creep of normal tides, but something faster, more deliberate. As if the sea knew this was the final reckoning. We shouldn't be here. Ewan secured the boat to the same rusted ring. The water's wrong. Moving wrong. Everything about this is wrong. Has been from the start. Nora climbed onto the stone steps. They were already slick, already disappearing beneath dark water. But we're finishing it anyway. Thunder rolled. Not from clouds, from somewhere deeper. From the stone itself, they descended into the castle's heart. Past the main hall where portraits watched with eyes that seemed more alive than paint should allow. Past the Lady Chapel where they had found the first box. Downstairs that led to places they hadn't explored. Places her grandmother's map showed as sealed chambers, the crypts. According to the map, there's a vault, separate from where we found the documents. Nora traced the path with her finger. My grandmother marked it with a different symbol, a rose with thorns. That's where the child is buried. That's where we'll find proof, not just of her existence, but of everything. She looked up. Once we have that, we have leverage. Dunthorne can't threaten what the entire world knows. They moved through water that was now waist-deep, cold enough to make breathing difficult. The lantern casting shadows that seemed to move independent of light, a sound behind them, splashing, voices. They followed us again. Ewan extinguished the lantern, but it was too late. Light bloomed from the passage they had just left. Multiple lanterns, multiple figures. Dunthorne's voice echoed through the stone chambers. Miss Whittaker, you've made this far more difficult than necessary. But it ends tonight. One way or another, keep moving. Nora pushed forward. Toward the passage her grandmother had marked. Toward the vault that held the final piece, they ran. Water slowing them. Dunthorne's men gaining. The tide rising faster now. As if something was pulling it in deliberately, the passage opened into a circular chamber. Stone walls carved with symbols. A door at the far end, sealed with mechanisms that looked more complex than anything else in the castle. This is it. Nora pulled out her grandmother's notes. Found the sequence. Help me! They worked together, turning stones in a specific pattern, pushing where the notes indicated pressure. The mechanisms grinding, resisting, then suddenly giving way. The door swung open on hinges that shouldn't still work after 40 years underwater. Inside, a small crypt. Stone walls dried despite the water surrounding them. And at the center, a tomb no larger than a cradle. Helena Catherine, beloved daughter. 1881-1884. She was real. Nora's voice broke. They didn't just hide documents. They hid her, beside the small tomb, another sealed container. This one larger, marked with both family crests intertwined. Ewan broke the seal. Inside, more documents. Birth records, medical records, letters between Catherine and the prince. Proof upon proof upon proof that could not be denied or explained away. This changes everything. He gathered the documents carefully. The entire line of succession. The legitimacy of the current monarch, everything. Footsteps behind them. Dunthorne and his men filling the doorway, step away from the tomb. Dunthorne's voice was cold, professional. You've had your adventure. Now it's time for adults to handle this properly. Properly? You mean hide it again? Destroy it. Nora moved between him and the documents. These are the truth. This child existed. She had rights. She had nothing. Because she's dead. Because history has moved on. Dunthorne stepped into the crypt, his men flanking him. You think revealing this serves anyone? It would destabilize a nation. Destroy institutions. For what? A child who's been dead for 40 years. For the truth. The truth is a luxury for people with nothing to lose. He reached for the documents. Give them to me, now! No. The word hung in the air, final, absolute. Dunthorne's expression shifted, the mask falling away completely, revealing something desperate beneath. You stupid girl. You have no idea what forces you're fighting. What power wants this buried? He grabbed for the documents. Nora pulled back. Ewan moved between them. Leave, now, while you still can. Or what? You'll fight us? There are 3 of us. 2 of you. Dunthorne's smile was terrible. And the tide is coming in. Soon this chamber will flood. And if you're still in here, well, drowning is such a tragic accident. The water was indeed rising, pouring through the open door, filling the chamber with frightening speed. The mechanisms, Ewan's voice was urgent. The door. It's designed to seal when water reaches a certain level. Then we leave. Now. Nora grabbed the documents, shoved them into her waterproof bag, but Dunthorne moved to block the door. His men with him. You're not leaving with those documents. Even if it means none of us leave at all. The water rose past their knees, past their waists, the chamber filling like a cup, and then the door moved. The same mechanisms that had opened it now reversing, beginning to close, sealing the chamber as it had been designed to do, protecting what lay inside from the sea's invasion. The door. One of Dunthorne's men lunged for it, but the mechanisms were inexorable. The door closing, water pressure making it impossible to stop. Ewan grabbed Nora's hand. The tomb. There's a passage behind it. I saw the marks. They dove under water that was now chest deep. Behind the small tomb, where a child had rested for 40 years, found the opening that shouldn't exist. A tunnel barely wide enough for a person. They squeezed through. Nora first. The documents pressed against her chest. Then Ewan. Behind them they heard Dunthorne screaming, his men trying frantically to force the door. The water rising, claiming them. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one with stairs leading up. They climbed, gasping, alive. The sounds of drowning men fading behind them, they emerged in the main hall, water following them, the tide reclaiming everything, the castle groaning, stone grinding against stone. It's collapsing. Ewan pulled her toward the exit. The whole structure. It's finally giving way. They ran, through halls that had stood for centuries, past portraits that seemed to watch them go with approval, past the Lady Chapel where her grandmother had sealed the first secrets, outside, into storm and night and water that rose around the castle like a living thing embracing what belonged to it. The boat was still there, barely. They fell into it. Ewan cutting the rope, rowing with desperate strength. Behind them the castle sank, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, as if it had been waiting, as if it had held on just long enough to reveal its secrets before letting go. The towers disappeared, the walls, everything, until there was nothing but dark water and the memory of stone. Dunthorne and his men were still inside, trapped in the vault they had tried to seal, drowned by the same water that had been meant to drown the truth. The sea had made its choice, had protected what needed protection, had claimed what needed claiming. Nora clutched the bag, the documents inside, the proof, the truth, everything her grandmother had died protecting. We made it. Ewan's voice was hollow with exhaustion and horror. We actually made it. She saved us, Isolde. She designed the tunnel, the escape route. Nora looked back at water that showed no sign of what it covered. She knew someone would come, that the truth would need to get out. They reached shore as dawn touched the horizon. Morven waited, her face tight with worry. She saw them, saw they were alone, understood what it meant. They're gone. They chose to stay, to try to keep the secrets buried. Nora stepped onto solid ground, felt the weight of everything that had happened settle into her bones. The sea chose differently inside. Dry clothes, hot tea. The documents spread on the table like evidence at a trial. What do we do now? Ewan's question wasn't rhetorical. It was genuine, lost. Nora stared at the papers, at proof that could change history, that could destroy institutions, that could rewrite everything people believed about their nation's foundation. I don't know. But we have time to decide, because the truth isn't going anywhere. Not anymore. Outside the sun rose. Light touched water that showed no sign of the castle that had stood there for centuries. But beneath that water, in chambers now truly drowned, 3 women's secrets waited, patient, preserved. The sea remembered. And now so did the living. 3 days passed. 3 days of staying inside, of watching the village return to its rhythm, of locals whispering but not asking. of knowing that Dunthorne's disappearance had been noted but would be explained away. Men vanished at sea all the time. The water kept its own counsel. Nora sat at Morven's kitchen table, the documents arranged in careful order. Marriage certificate, birth certificate, medical records, letters written in a prince's hand to a woman he promised to cherish until death. You haven't slept, Morven set tea down. You just stare at them, like they'll tell you what to do. They're evidence. They're proof. They're everything. Nora touched the marriage certificate. But what do I do with them? Publish them? Destroy a monarchy? Start a war over something that happened 40 years ago? Your grandmother kept them secret. My grandmother was threatened. She was alone in a foreign country with no one to protect her. Nora looked up. I have options, resources I could tell the world, and the world would eat you alive for it. Ewan entered from outside, carrying fresh bread, looking like he had aged years in 3 days. I've been asking around quietly about Dunthorne, about who he worked for. And? He wasn't working for the government. Not officially. He was working for a preservation society, private, well-funded, dedicated to protecting the royal family's image. He sat heavily. They have resources, connections. If they think you're a threat, they'll destroy you. Academic reputation, personal life, everything. Let them try, Nora. Morven's voice was gentle. What does winning look like? You reveal the documents, prove the child existed, prove the marriage was real. And then what? Do you think the crown abdicates? Do you think they say, oh, you're right, we were wrong for 40 years? They have to acknowledge the truth. They have to do nothing. Truth without power is just noise. She poured more tea. But there are other ways, quieter ways, ways that preserve the truth without destroying everything around it. That night, Nora dreamed. She stood in the Lady Chapel, waist-deep in water that didn't feel cold. Lady Isolde stood beside her. No longer a ghost, solid, real, beautiful in the way strong things are beautiful. You found her. Isolde's voice was the same voice Nora had heard singing. You found my Helena. I found the truth. But I don't know what to do with it. Preserve what must be remembered, not what must destroy. Isolde touched her shoulder. The touch warm despite impossible. I wanted her life to mean something, to be acknowledged. But I never wanted her death to cause more death. They killed Catherine, your Catherine, the woman you loved. They killed her with grief and isolation. But revealing that now won't bring her back, won't give Helena the life she deserved. Isolde's expression was sad, wise. Tell the story, but tell it as what it is. A tragedy, a warning, not a weapon. How? You're a historian. You know how to preserve truth without wielding it like a sword, she smiled. Let the documents rest in archives where they can be studied. But tell Helena's story. Let people know she existed, that she mattered, that love is real even when authority denies it. They'll say it's fiction. Let them. Stories survive longer than facts. Myths outlive kingdoms. She began to fade, water rising around her. Reclaiming her, the sea remembers. Make sure the world remembers too. In its own way, Nora woke to morning light, to clarity. She knew what to do. She spent 2 weeks writing, not an academic paper, not a journal article, but a story. Helena's story, Catherine's story, her grandmother's story, the truth wrapped in narrative, in emotion, in the kind of telling that made people care rather than just know. She called it the drowned crown. She sent copies to archives, to libraries, to universities. The original documents she sealed in a vault in Edinburgh, where they could be accessed, studied but not weaponized. She sent 1 copy to the royal family, with a note, these people existed. They loved. They mattered. Let their story be remembered as what it is, a tragedy born from fear, not a threat to what you've built. She never received a response. But that was answer enough. The story spread, quietly at first, then with growing interest. Some called it fiction, others called it historical speculation. A few whispered it might be true, but everyone who read it remembered Helena, the child who never grew up, the love that couldn't save her, the women who tried, and that Nora realized was enough. Not justice, but memory. And memory was its own kind of justice. 5 years later, Boston, October, Nora sat in her study, surrounded by books and artifacts and the quiet accumulation of a historian's life. On her desk, the original photograph of her grandmother standing before the castle. Beside it, a new photograph, taken last summer, of Nora standing in the same spot. The castle was gone, completely submerged now. The tide had claimed even the highest towers, but the story remained. The Drowned Crown had been published anonymously, spread through literary circles, been adapted for the stage, been whispered about in academic halls. Some knew it was true. Most thought it was beautiful fiction. Both were correct. A letter arrived. From Scotland. From Ewan, strange lights have been seen over the bay, where the castle stood. Locals say it's just phosphorescence, sea creatures glowing. But I've seen it, and it looks like lanterns, like torches burning in towers that aren't there anymore. Thought you'd want to know. Nora booked passage the next day. The village hadn't changed. Still small, still wrapped in mist and secrets. Morven still kept the inn. Now with Ewan's help. They had married quietly. Two people who understood the weight of inherited oaths and the courage it took to break them. You came. Morven embraced her. I told you and you would. Of course I came. If the castle is calling, I have to answer. That night they rode out together. All three of them, to the place where the castle had stood, where it had drowned twice, where 3 generations of women had kept faith with a child who died too young. The water was calm, black glass reflecting stars. And then, as midnight approached, the lights began. Green, phosphorescent, rising from the depths. Not random, but deliberate. Following patterns, marking where towers had stood, where the Lady Chapel had overlooked the sea, where the vault had protected its secrets. It's her. Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Isolde, she's still here. Or it's the sea. Ewan's voice was equally soft. Remembering what it holds. The lights moved. Formed shapes. Almost recognizable. A woman, a child. 2 figures standing together. Then dispersing, fading, leaving only darkness and stars. But as the lights faded, Nora heard it. The same song, her grandmother's lullaby. Isolde's farewell, carried on water and wind, and something deeper than either. She sang the words she remembered. Her grandmother's voice in her memory guiding her. When the sea calls your name, don't be afraid. The water remembers what love has made. Sleep in the deep where the truth lies safe. Until someone comes who is brave enough to wake. The wind picked up. Not violent, but present, acknowledging, and for a moment Nora felt a hand on her shoulder, warm, real. Impossible. Her grandmother, Isolde, Catherine, Helena, all of them. All present. All remembered. Then the moment passed. The wind calmed. The water stilled, but Nora knew. The sea had accepted her offering. The story, the memory, the truth preserved in ways that honored rather than destroyed. They rowed back to shore. None of them speaking, no words adequate for what they had witnessed. In the morning, Nora stood at the dock, preparing to leave, to return to Boston, to her life of cataloging other people's histories. But she carried something now that she hadn't carried before. Purpose, connection, understanding that some stories transcend time, that love survives drowning, that truth endures even when it's told in whispers and songs and anonymous publications that no one can prove are real. Morven pressed something into her hand. Your grandmother left this with mine, to be returned when the story was told. A letter, sealed with wax that had survived decades of waiting. Nora opened it carefully. My dearest granddaughter, if you are reading this, then you finished what I could not. You told Helena's story. You honored Catherine's love. You let the world know that we existed, that we mattered. The sea remembers what we buried. But more importantly, you remembered. And memory is the only immortality any of us truly need. Live well. Love freely. And when the sea calls your name, don't be afraid. The water remembers what love has made, always. Margaret Nora folded the letter carefully, placed it in her bag beside the photograph and the copy of The Drowned Crown that had started everything. She looked out at the water one final time, the surface calm, giving no sign of what it held. The castle! The secrets. The generations of women who had sacrificed everything for a truth that might never change history, but would always matter. She whispered the words that had begun her grandmother's first letter. The words that had brought her here. The words that would follow her home. The sea remembers what we buried, and it did. It always would. She turned and walked away, toward the future, carrying the past, knowing that some stories don't end. They just change hands, pass from one guardian to the next, survive in the telling rather than the proving. Behind her, the waves touched the shore, gentle, persistent, eternal, remembering, always remembering. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.